coming up on Arirang News. The death toll from the earthquakes in Turkey and Syria tops 37,000. A week on from the deadliest earthquakes in recent history, rescuers are still striving to search for survivors. Vice Foreign Chiefs of South Korea, the U.S. and Japan sit down in Washington and agree to strengthen their cooperation against North Korea's threats. Also on the sidelines, Seoul and Tokyo discuss compensation for Japan's wartime forced labor, but are yet to reach common ground. South Korea's outbound shipments of tech items last month dropped across nearly all major categories. In January, the country's ICT exports have seen an all-year fall for 7 consecutive months. Hello, it's 9 p.m. here in South Korea. Thank you for joining us on Arirang News. We begin with the aftermath of the devastating earthquakes over in Turkey and Syria. Miraculously, survivors are being found, but authorities say rescue operations are now in their final hours. The death toll stands at over 37,000 and millions more are affected. Kim Hyun-sung reports.
Rescue operations in Turkey and Syria are nearing a close, with the death toll from the earthquakes now crossing over 37,000. In Turkey, more than 31,000, and in Syria, more than 5,800. Millions have lost homes, friends, and family.
We now live on the streets right by the road. We stay up at night in the front yard, and eventually, when we start falling asleep, we get in the vehicle which we have covered. We sleep in the car.
Karam, Noor and their mother were under the rubble. We kept searching for 2 days to get them out. According to the Lebanese forensic doctor, Karam died on the 2nd day because the blood on his face was fresh. I'm sad.
Chances of finding more survivors grow more remote by the minute. But with stories of miracle rescues more than 100 hours after the quake, some are still holding on to the hope. According to UNICEF, some 4.6 million children live in the affected regions of Turkey, while there are another 2.5 million children in Syria. It's vital to get humanitarian aid to these regions as soon as possible. But with Syria still divided into lands controlled by rebels and territory held by the government, delivering aid to the affected population continues to be a challenge. Kim Hyun-sung, Arirang News.
South Korea's neighboring country, Japan, also suffers from earthquakes. But experts there say that because of just how powerful the ones in Turkey and Syria were, it would be almost impossible to prepare in advance. Our Kim Jong-sil reports.
For experts in Japan, the devastation in Turkey and Syria is personal. Having gone through the 2011 Tohoku earthquake and tsunami, and as a country that long suffers from earthquakes, this is a matter that they can relate to.
In the case of the March 11 earthquake, a reverse fault earthquake it was, which doesn't affect the ground as much. But it happens in the seabed, which caused a tsunami that killed many people. But in Turkey, the quakes moved the land sideways near the cities, causing massive damage.
Another renowned expert from Japan said it's extremely difficult to predict these types of quakes in advance.
An earthquake of this magnitude comes once in 5 centuries or a millennium. If we're sure that one's definitely coming once every certain number of years, we are able to forecast the next one based on the data. But earthquakes don't work like that. They don't come in a set period, which is why it's difficult to predict them.
Professor Io has dedicated his life trying to predict earthquakes, having experienced the Kobe earthquake in 1995 that took thousands of lives. We asked him what he feels when he heard about the devastation in Turkey and Syria.
It's not so much that I feel helpless, but I do think that what we're doing isn't helping the world as much as we'd hope. In Japan, huge earthquakes hit and people's lives have been taken. It's happened so often that I became numb, which is not good. But all I can do is focus every day on trying to understand earthquakes better and hope that my research can somehow help people in the future.
Not as often and devastating as Japan, Türkiye, or Syria, South Korea also has earthquakes, although on a milder scale. One official said it's important to prepare for earthquakes, even though South Korea is relatively safe.
We think it's important to send an alert, even if it's just 1 or 2 seconds earlier when an earthquake hits and a huge impact can be predicted. In those seconds, people can protect themselves or stop what they're doing if it's dangerous. We think this could save lives.
All the experts from both South Korea and Japan said it's important to learn from the earthquakes in Turkey and Syria and better prepare for the future. Kim Jung-sil, Arirang News.
Cyclone Gabrielle has wreaked havoc in New Zealand, prompting that country to declare a state of emergency for the 3rd time in its history. Our Jo Sung-min has the latest.
New Zealand declared a national state of emergency on Tuesday as Cyclone Gabrielle caused massive flooding, landslides, and ocean swells across the nation. It's New Zealand's 3rd state of emergency in its history, the first 2 having been issued in 2020 during the pandemic and in 2011 after the Christchurch earthquake. The cyclone has brought extensive downpours for over 2 straight days, mostly battering the northern areas, including Auckland, Northland, Waikato, Bay of Plenty, Tairawiti, and Hawke's Bay. Thousands of people were forced to evacuate from their homes, with many of them found stranded on rooftops, and more than 220,000 people lost electricity. Air New Zealand has reportedly resumed operations for some flights in and out of Auckland, but most other routes are suspended. Some regions saw damage to public infrastructure and roads. The authorities said dozens of supermarkets were flooded. New Zealand's Prime Minister Chris Hipkins said in Tuesday's press conference that the severity of the damage is something that many people have never seen before.
People will be aware that a national state of emergency has been declared, and that means that we'll be throwing everything at this to make sure we're providing as much support to the response as possible.
Hipkins also added it was too early to say how many people had been displaced or injured. No deaths have been confirmed. As of Tuesday afternoon, the cyclone is 100 kilometers east of Auckland, near the east coast of the North Island. It's believed that while the worst is certainly over, rain and strong winds will persist as rescue operations continue. Jo Sung-min, Arirang News.
Over in the U.S., diplomats from Seoul, Tokyo, and Washington have renewed calls for Pyongyang to surrender its nuclear ambitions. Also on the sidelines of that trilateral talk, delegates from Korea and neighboring Japan sat down to address their differences over compensation for forced labor victims. Our Foreign Ministry correspondent Choi Min-jung has more.
South Korea and Japan's first vice foreign ministers sat down in Washington on Monday to discuss the ongoing dispute over compensation for Korean victims of Japan's wartime forced labor. After the meeting, South Korea's first vice foreign minister Cho Hyun-dong told reporters that the two sides have yet to reach an agreement. Cho said that more consultations will be needed with Japan, calling the situation a very sensitive issue for both countries. Last month, Seoul unveiled plans to compensate the victims through its own public foundation. But this prompted backlash from the victims, who insist the issue cannot be resolved without sincere apologies and participation from the Japanese companies involved. Pundits say talks on the matter will likely continue on the sidelines of a foreign ministers' meeting at the Munich Security Conference later this week. The latest talks followed a trilateral meeting between the vice foreign ministers of South Korea, the United States, and Japan, where the three countries reaffirmed their commitment to cooperating against threats from North Korea. Speaking at a joint press briefing after the sit-down in Washington, South Korea's representative said they will enhance their security cooperation to counter growing threats from Pyongyang.
First of all, we committed ourselves to respond firmly to any North Korean provocation and work toward complete denuclearization of North Korea. Indeed, peace without denuclearization is fake peace.
Standing united, our nations will deter the DPRK and urge it to give up its nuclear weapons program and abide by its obligations under UN Security Council resolutions.
The remarks come as Sherman said North Korea continued to threaten South Korea and the world with an unprecedented number of ballistic missile launches last year. Stressing their trilateral relationship is strong and growing stronger day by day, Sherman reiterated that their alliance is both ironclad and vital to regional and global security. Choi Min-dong, Arirang News.
Korea and NATO held their first ever staff-level dialogue amid current tensions on the peninsula. Seoul's Joint Chiefs of Staff says the two-day meeting here in Seoul ended on this Tuesday, following talks on ways to bolster cooperation and to chart a future path in partnership. The NATO delegation also visited the joint security area near the inter-Korean border, and NATO Representative Lieutenant General Francesco Diella said the visit was symbolic to laying the groundwork for future Korea-NATO relations. The next Director General level talks will take place in Belgium next year. South Korea's trade balance for tech products managed to be in the black in January, but is on a downward trend. It declined on year for 7 straight months from the sluggish global economy and semiconductors. South Korea's tech exports last month slowed across nearly all major products. The Ministry of Trade, Industry and Energy released a report on Tuesday showing that the country's ICT exports stood at around $13.1 billion. This is more than a 33% drop compared to the same period a year earlier and an on-year fall for the 7th consecutive month. Last month's drop was mainly due to a slump in the semiconductor industry. Outbound shipments of chips last month stood at around $6 billion, down by 43.5% on year. Exports of both memory and system chips declined as the global tech demand slowed and prices fell because of accumulated inventories.
The price of DRAM, which is South Korea's flagship export, has gone down by 40% on year and demand has fallen due to the sluggish global economy. But demand for memory semiconductors is showing an increase as interest in AI like ChatGPT is rising. The memory chip industry is likely to recover as early as the second half of this year.
Shipments of displays also decreased by around 38% in January compared to the same period in the previous year, recording around $1.4 billion with the sluggish demand for OLED displays. Computers and related equipment also plunged by nearly 60% on year, falling to $630 million. However, exports of mobile phones rose by around 24% last month with the release of new models and the normalization of factories worldwide. ICT exports to the 5 major countries have all fallen on year, with exports to China decreasing by around 43% and to the U.S. by nearly 20%. Meanwhile, the country's ICT exports in January fell just 1.1% on year to around $12 billion. With this, the trade surplus for the ICT sector last month was $890 million, which is the lowest since July 1997. As South Korea aims to turn its defense sector into a key export industry, the Ministries of Defense and Trade have joined hands as part of concentrated efforts to encourage and support innovation in cutting-edge technologies. Our defense correspondent Oh Soo-young has more.
Seoul plans to spend over $1.5 billion to become one of the world's 4 leading defense exporters, investing in cutting-edge artificial intelligence, drones, space and future technologies. South Korea's Ministry of Defense on Tuesday held its first joint committee session with the Ministry of Trade, Industry and Energy to discuss various plans to bolster the nation's innovative and commercial capacity and become a defense tech powerhouse. The Defense Ministry says the joint committee meeting was held to follow up on the Defense Export Strategy meeting held last November by President Yoon. In doing so, the ministry set out to strengthen pan-governmental efforts to better coordinate support for industry players and provide post-sale support for client countries. It also aims to increase the defense industry's competitiveness by fostering a vibrant R&D landscape and bolstering supply chain networks. In order to develop and commercialize world-class defense technologies, the Finance Ministry introduced its third draft plan to strengthen links between the civilian and military sectors, with an investment of 1.5 trillion won, or over $1 billion by 2027. It will also promote more high-risk, high-return investments for R&D in 16 core areas that include drones, AI, space, virtual reality, and robotics. To increase self-sufficiency in producing such technologies, the government also plans to inject $157 million into developing 40 core materials and parts, as well as nurturing talent pools in sectors like aviation and machinery. In particular, it aims to provide over $78 million annually in funding for small and medium businesses. The plan is expected to be confirmed at this month's National Science and Technology Advisory Council meeting. Loan schemes and funding options to encourage innovation and deals with client countries were also addressed under a financial support plan introduced in December. Seoul's defense exports hit a record high of $17.3 billion last year. Oh Soo-young, Arirang News.
The South Korean government plans to fund the purchase and running of 400 more hydrogen buses this year in order to reduce greenhouse gas emissions. The Ministry of Trade, Industry and Energy held a briefing on Tuesday to launch the pilot project and said funding will be given to the 17 regional and local governments around the country. It'll subsidize the cost of purchasing hydrogen buses, building more hydrogen charging stations for commercial vehicles, and replacing hydrogen fuel cell systems in hydrogen buses. The ministry also said it plans to expand the number of hydrogen buses from the current 280 to 5,000 by the year 2025. With cheap electric buses from overseas beginning to dominate the Korean market for eco-friendly public transport, the government plans to invest in locally manufactured hydrogen buses and charging stations. President Yoon says he'll support the nation's sports in order for it to become an industry that drives the country's growth. This on Tuesday as he visited Jincheon National Training Center in Chungcheongbuk-do province. He added that in order to achieve this, the government will make sure that the athletics market is managed fairly and will foster international cooperation. The visit came as the Ministry of Culture, Sports and Tourism briefed the president on its vision. It also coincided with the kickoff for the Asian Games, with athletes preparing for the Games this coming September. President Yoon visited a number of facilities during his visit, including archery team's training area, a sport in which South Korea holds dominance internationally. Good news for South Koreans living abroad. The nation's main political parties have agreed to support the government launching a new agency dedicated to consular affairs. Our National Assembly correspondent Han Sung-woo has the details.
South Korea's ruling and main opposition parties have agreed to support a government reorganization plan that includes the launch of a new agency under the Foreign Ministry devoted to consular affairs, dealing specifically with the lives and interests of Koreans overseas. The revision, expected to be passed by the National Assembly later this month, will also see the nation's Ministry of Patriots and Veterans Affairs upgraded to a cabinet-level government body, meaning the Veterans Minister, who currently sits in on cabinet meetings, will soon be able to take full part in the cabinet's decision-making process. The announcement came at a meeting on Tuesday between 3 senior members of the People Power Party and 3 from the Democratic Party of Korea. They failed, however, to reach a consensus on whether to abolish the Ministry of Gender Equality and Family, a key election pledge of President Yoon Suk-yeol. The Democratic Party, which holds a majority in parliament, have opposed the idea over concerns it could undermine gender equality. That issue, along with the establishment of a national space agency, awaits further discussion between the rival parties. Han Sung-woo, Arirang News.
In a speech to the National Assembly on Tuesday, the floor leader of the ruling People Power Party, Joo Ho-young, said South Korea's low birth rate is a potential disaster for the nation, calling it a cancer that's silently killing the country, and urged lawmakers to take action. Floor leader Ju also accused the main opposition party of degrading South Korea's parliamentary democracy by railroading disputed bills, thereby abusing the power it wields, having a majority of seats in the legislature. On top of that, he criticized DP chairman Lee Jae-myung, who's facing several allegations of corruption for damaging parliament's prestige. In response, DP floor leader Park Hong-gun told reporters that it was disappointing that Ju spent so much time blaming the opposition instead of focusing more on policy and his own party's vision. Najeon is a traditional Korean aesthetic technique that uses mother of pearl, a composite material produced by some mollusks in an inner shell layer on lacquered objects. It's known for its brilliance and timelessness and is something that has been around for centuries. But with worries that Najeon could become a lost art form, our Shin Se-byuk went to go and meet one of the country's master Najeon artisans to learn more about the technique and its legacy.
Brilliant, shimmering hues glimmer in the light. This is the beauty of Najeon, a Korean traditional craft that brings together mother-of-pearl inlays and lacquerware. The technique has been handed down for centuries in South Korea. Choi Sang-un, one of the 3 Najeon master artisans recently named by the Cultural Heritage Administration, has dedicated more than half a century to creating traditional Najeon crafts. Creating these complex crafts demands perseverance. It begins with the base, filling the gaps with freshly made clay glue. Once dried, the artisan draws the outline. And a natural glue made of fish gelatin is carefully applied to make sure the mother of pearls are well attached to the surface. And here begins the real magic. Cutting mother of pearl into shapes and threads. A delicate touch and precise cutting are needed to ensure the highest quality.
0.029까지 나와요.
Creating each piece can take several weeks or even months. But finding authentic Najeon craft work has become rare with mass production.
Moving away from traditional methods isn't necessarily wrong. You swim with the tide. Crafts change as things become modernized, and there are people like me who keep traditions alive.
Still, he says he feels obliged to pass down the skills to the next generation as a designated master artisan. He has 4 students who want to continue his legacy.
It's a call of duty, a duty given to me by the country to keep the tradition alive. Not many want to learn this traditional craft because you can't use it to build big wealth. But I'm lucky. I have my students here. I will pass down all I have to them. That's hope.
As a craftsman preserving the spirit of Najeon artisanship, just as the magic of it lies in creating art from scratch.
Painters draw pictures with paint, and I'm a painter who draws with mother of pearl. We breathe life into discarded seashells and lacquer trees. All Najeon ingredients are from nature. That's how we create things from scratch. Najeon itself is nature.
Shin Se-byuk, Arirang News.
Similar weather conditions will take over across the nation tomorrow. The pattern of mostly chilly mornings with warm daytime highs will prevail again. Lows in Seoul will be cold at -2 degrees Celsius. Sensible temperatures will be about 2 degrees lower due to frigid wind chills. Maximum temperatures will be in the positive territory, causing some fluctuation in daily temperatures, so dressing in layers will be highly recommended. In the meantime, snowfall will continue for parts of the east. For the coastlines of Gangwon-do province, heavy snowfall of up to 10 centimeters in the forecast. The rest of the east coast, including the coastlines of Gyeongsang-do province, as well as the mountainous regions of Jeju Island, will see 3 to 8 centimeters. The surrounding regions will also see some light snowflakes flying around. Tomorrow, Seoul and Daejeon will be starting off at -2 degrees. As for the daily highs, Seoul and Gwangju will get up to 7 degrees. Chuncheon and Daegu will be topping out at 6 degrees Celsius. And for Seoul, morning conditions will stay cold until this Friday with temperatures in the minus range. That's all for now, and here are the weather conditions around the world.
That is all for today's newscast. Thank you for watching. We'll be back with the most up-to-date news tomorrow. Take care.